So, Frances, you originally set up the media design school back in the late 90s. What did you learn from that experience? How did it all come about?
Actually, the media design school was actually set up by my mother and I, and she was coming out of the travel and tourism industry and been in training, and I had been around in sort of business consultancy around technology companies, and we got talking together about opportunities, and she was looking fundamentally about where technology was going, and I was looking at from the user end, and it really came out of just an opportunity of a gap in the market. The space around the internet was really growing so quickly, and typically the tertiary educations and universities were really struggling to get around their head around it because it was so fast moving, and it really we saw that the private market was really where it had to come from. And when Media Design School launched in 1998, it was really at the early days. We were still talking about big beige computers on the desk, and floppy disks and zips and scanning images and bromides for logos, and you think that's only 15 years ago that things have changed so significantly. And the early adopters back then were fundamentally people whose industries had changed. They were mature adult students, and they had their backgrounds were around things like photography, and suddenly had gone digital and away from analogue, or sign writers who suddenly has seen that they could no longer just paint signs, but they had to have digital competency, and designers who were looking at going to animation. And there was a lot of noise around the time about the future. The Lord of the Rings was about to come out, and people knew there was going to be a new demand for computer graphics, and they really were quite a pioneering group of students, but typically over the age of sort of 25 had qualifications existing. But over the years that changed significantly, and an entire new generation started coming through who were far more savvy and were really planning a career from the beginning in the outset, as opposed to sort of changing careers.
You must have seen a phenomenal change in the standard from those students in the late 90s to the ones that you're dealing with today. I mean, it is amazing, isn't it, though, a little over a decade, that the competency rate could grow so quickly. Has that surprised you?
Yeah, in the early days, in some ways the students were more innovative because the technology didn't do nearly as much as it does now, so they had to really push the technology. So if you're looking at the size of files they could have, I can remember very clearly the first time we got a 50 meg file, and we looked at each other and said, what do we do with a 50 meg file? How do we even store this? And of course, so they had some really, some of the constraints they were dealing with students, they had to really do a lot of workarounds. And the actual rendering process of putting out high quality files was limited too because of the computer processing power. So as that increased and the cost of storage became more affordable, then students could really start pushing this quality, and you could really start putting into the visual effects categories where we now see the high quality HD content coming out of, not only out of the movie world, but actually out of institutes. And that's really only because of the increase in computing technology.
And of course, you've moved now into the Mind Lab, which is your latest business venture. Tell us about that, because it has intriguing possibilities, particularly the age range that you're looking to target.
Sure. The Mind Lab has actually been a bit of a dream for many years, and what really sort of spawned the idea, a few years ago I started watching the age of students coming into the media design school dropping to high school leavers for the first time. They were coming in to pursue degrees, and the capability they had in terms of technical skills was so much superior to what someone of say the similar age group 10 years earlier had. So I started going backwards, saying, okay, if a 17-year-old can have this type of capability, what does a 15-year-old have, and what potentially can a 10-year-old do? And I ended up going right back to 2-year-olds, where I started seeing this incredible amount of just savviness around technology and the ability to be totally adaptive. And they could pick up an iPad or a phone and figure it out within moments, how to use it, how to unlock it, how to find the apps on it. And once we got to touch screens, and certainly with the iPad, was the ability that a student or a child could pick up a device without any speech, and without having any ability to read or write, could actually interrelate with a screen. And I think that really changed the world, and that was really just a few years ago. So I started then looking at globally what people were doing, what age were institutes formally engaging with children and actually encouraging them to sort of get under the bonnet and not just use their technology, but actually understand how to create things to go onto the technology. And it really came back to from the age of 4, most kids are very adaptive and are looking for more stimulation. And if you bring learning into a fun, engaging environment and take away the forced learning, we could see that a 4-year-old was very capable of picking up new skills. And so the Mind Lab really focuses on that age group between 4 and 14. And 14 is set there because once they get to that sort of around that 15-year-old age group, they're starting to go into formal exams and into the formal education system, and their subjects are fairly well defined. What we're hoping to do by the Mind Lab is actually getting students exposed to new skills, for example, electronics or programming or new types of science that actually may influence the subjects they take by the time they get to high school and the subjects they take when they're going through into NCEA or Cambridge, etc. So it is more about exposing people as opposed, or exposing children to new opportunities as opposed to just following what they're seeing more of the same from the school system. One very clear observation I had through the Media Design School was the majority of students who came through, or who still continue to go through, have family or friends from one of the key sectors. So they're either in the science or technology industry, they're coming out of a programming background or arts, advertising, so that type world. So they have actually seen firsthand and had those influences from an early age. But when you look at that and you look outside those students, is how do all the other students out in the marketplace get that exposure and really understand what a 21st century career looks like if the only reference point they have is their immediate environment and their home life. And the Mind Lab will address that in 2 ways. One, having students be able to come in after school and just look at, trying robotics. What does robotics do? And so in the process of having fun and learning about robotics, they're also improving their skills with maths and also with programming. But then you're going to have school groups as well who can come in for a session, for a morning, for an afternoon, for a full day, and actually focus on areas that perhaps they cannot deliver within a school environment. And if you look at a typical primary intermediate school in New Zealand, they are still requiring students to be taught by an individual teacher who is not a specialist. They are a generalist, and they have to be by nature. So they are missing potentially the skills of somebody who the teacher themselves has not been exposed to. And that's also limited often by the actual resources that they have and the time they have available outside the core curriculum that they have to teach. So the Mind Lab actually gives the opportunity for a teacher to say, do you know what, I really don't know anything about science or in-depth knowledge of science, or I don't have a huge understanding of how you do electronics. Let's go somewhere that does, and let's make it, so we're providing a very affordable access for those schools to come in.
What about those who might say, kids, their rate of learning has been pushed, further and further down, and they don't get a chance to be kids anymore? That it's this world of having to constantly absorb and adapt. Is there some validity to that argument, do you think, or do you think this just plays to kids' natural curiosity?
I think that you really have to look at, if you're looking at technology, it is a tool, and it's a tool that does many things. And I hear a lot of people saying that my kids spend too much time at the computer. But in many ways, the computer is an uber tool. And if they can utilise it in a way that what they can do is, one, create more time for themselves, because actually they can use it efficiently, so they can be doing a large range of subjects based upon one particular piece of hardware. Whereas if we looked at, before we were going into different environments, using different sets of skills and tools each time, I do think that there is a lot of innovation comes through just giving children access to the most modern of tools. And in our case, it is fundamentally a computer, which can also be a science lab, it can also be an electronics lab, it can be, they all come together into one device.
And I understand you've had plenty of interest from schools already in the concept. So you see yourself very much as complementary to schools, not becoming a school in itself. No,
definitely. We certainly are complementary. And in the perfect world for me, we would have elements of what we do going back into all schools. So that schools would have the confidence to say, look, this is what we learned. We're trying to approach all of our classes by things you would find in a typical home. So if you're doing a science lab, it's not about going out and getting all the very best of science equipment. It's actually saying, what could you do at home that would teach the principles of science in a fun way, where if you get to blow stuff up, then all the better. But how could you take some of those elements back into a school environment? And for me, it is all about sharing, and this is really trying to get an entire new generation of kids coming across New Zealand who could say, well, how do we teach differently? How do we pose questions that kids will pick up and maybe come back with another question, not necessarily an answer? And the school system right now is so focused on the answer because you need that answer to pass the exam. Whereas if you're looking at true innovation, it's about saying, this is one capability. How could I take this, push it further, and create another whole set of possibilities? And that's really what we're trying to provoke, is the thought behind the activity that then inspires them to take it further.
Now, you've looked at models around the world, and I know a number of other countries, and I've read in the United States that these sort of programs are popping up everywhere. So is this modelled on something that you've looked at overseas, or is this fairly uniquely a New Zealand approach?
It is definitely a combination of both. I've looked at many models overseas and seen what people are doing really well, and every country seems to approach them slightly differently. They're funded differently in different markets, and then by the nature of the country, in Scandinavia they have these great open learning environments. Parts of Eastern Europe are the same. In the US they're more structured, but the underlying principles of all of them are the same. It is all about discovery. It's getting kids excited and involved in an authentic learning process that they're not necessarily seeing at school. And I think we want to be very clear, we don't want kids coming in thinking they're going to school. So internally with the staff and the team have developed, we want people to wonder and to ponder. That's the two words we're really trying to push. It's saying we want kids coming and saying, I wonder how that works, as opposed to just accepting that it works. And then to ponder, how could it be done differently? How could we utilise this knowledge and do something different with it? And the convergent space between science, technology and discovery is actually really interesting, because as these elements converge, that's really where we're going to get these innovations and the pioneers of the future. And if we can get those kids early on, if we can find a 10-year-old who's saying, you know what, I can understand how science can fit with music, and how music can fit with technology, we're really going to start seeing some great new developments happening here. But if they don't get that exposure, it's going to take a much greater leap of faith to get that kid across the line to understand how they could really make a difference in this place.
Is there also going to be an opportunity to talent spot here? Because I've often thought that in New Zealand we're very good at being able to pick 10-year-olds who are going to become future All Blacks, but we don't necessarily spot the intellectual talent early and then perhaps nurture that accordingly.
I think absolutely, and to be honest, even the last few weeks I've been astounded. I've had 14 to 16-year-olds, exclusively male I have to say, contact me saying, look, I'm outside of the age group of the Mind Lab, or I'm just inside it, but actually I've been developing apps for the last 4 or 5 years. I've got a robotics club that I teach down the road. In the weekends my friend and I have a band, but we're in 4 different countries and we're all jamming together, and how can I get involved with the Mind Lab? Now, I think if you went back to those same kids and followed their progress over the next few years, I can see already they're quite identifiable as early adopters and also entrepreneurs. They're out there, they're articulate, they're utilising social media in the way that it's very positive. This generation is so collaborative. They want to share. They're very open about their ideas. They try to involve others. There's just so many wonderful things that this generation brings, partially I think because of social media. It's really enabled them to be able to share in a way where online they have to give everyone a voice. Everybody's remote, so they can't have the benefit of a dominant personality in a room, or everybody it's an even playing field. But I would say even just these young students who have contacted me already, they are already showing signs of great leaders in the future. So if we can find some more of those coming through the Mind Lab and perhaps single them out a little bit and actually really encourage them and take away some of the barriers that they'll face on their journey, then I think we'd be onto a good thing.
What about the digital divide? Because obviously you're going to have to charge for this. This is a private business venture. You're doing it because you're obviously very passionate about it. Obviously, the business model itself has to work. How doesn't this play into the issue of the digital divide? Those that have got the money will continue to get better. those who haven't will continue to fall further behind.
Yeah, it is actually a great fear of mine that that would be the situation. I mean, my real passion sits in those who perhaps don't have the same opportunity. I've been involved the last little while with out in Otara, the Computer Clubhouse, which is recently renamed to Studio 274, and seeing the difference that having access to technology and the skills can make to an individual and a community. And for me personally, it's really about making sure we reach those individuals. So the way we're doing that is the after-school and holiday weekend type programs will actually help subsidise the school groups. So the school groups, a student coming will be paying $12. So it's not a prohibitive amount. It may require some fundraising, but it makes it still accessible for a student at almost any school in New Zealand to be able to come through. Long term, I mean, there may be other models that need to be looked at. One of the things I've sort of deliberately avoided is looking at a funding model where you're relying on a third-party funding or a government agency, because of course then what happens often they have to tie those back to competencies and compliance, which is set in another time, or the time we're trying to avoid, sitting back on a 20th century model. So to actually be in a new space and create a new model, you really have to be very bold. And I'm very hopeful that the financial model that we've gone through exhaustively, that although it does limit it perhaps to some families in the after-school programs, that we'll still be able to capture those same children or other children through the actual daytime school programs.
Based on the popularity that you're already receiving, it would seem that you're going to have to look at growth pretty quickly. Are you looking at rolling this out around the country?
I would actually love to see this roll out around the world. I think if we can take this as a New Zealand product to the world, is for me the really exciting space. That we can say that we were leading the charge in early childhood education from that 4 to 14 age group, and applying things and teaching in a different way. And although other centres exist around the world, I think that we do bring a distinctly New Zealand flavour to it. It is all about focusing on that under the bonnet thinking, and I really want to focus on, we've really developed a team of educators who every day astound me. They're coming up with just posing a question, and how a question and then having kids discover ways of actually providing an answer without actually setting out to achieve a particular outcome. Small group learning, collaborative learning in a very creative environment. I think those things will be fairly unique. They're a lot less prescriptive than perhaps you might see in other parts of the world. But I would really love to see the Mind Lab be a global business.
Can this be a viable business venture as well? Because I mean, it's got all of the the wonderful aspects of it, that it adds value to the world. But can you actually make money out of it?
Well, I certainly hope so. I mean, obviously the growth depends on it making sense. The early indications are very clear that people understand that this is a missing part in education right now, and parents are certainly right behind it. The future success and the ability to educate an entire generation really requires it to work that way. But we are in early days, and we'll see how we go. But I believe 100% in this project, and so do my team. And so it will take, it's going to take a lot of energy over the next few years to get this model right. But we are absolutely committed, and I think that we're in a good position.
I understand your teenage sons have been involved in the consultation process, so you're actively taking advice from the end users.
Definitely. My boys have been great in terms of telling me what's good and what's bad, and also for me as a mum, following them over the years growing up and seeing what they're exposed to, and how they can pick up things that I really grapple with in moments, and also see things, the potential of just the most simple of applications. Suddenly they can see the potential and the way they share, and so they've really had an input right from what I should be teaching, how I should be teaching it, what's cool and what's definitely not, and also what they and their friends are looking for in careers, and that's been really telling. And the types of careers people are looking at, what do they need to get there? And interesting enough, almost all of the careers, particularly for boys, do require science, technology and maths in the future, and yet the school system doesn't necessarily encourage those subjects to be retained right through. And of course, if you end up trying to get into a university, into a subject area where, if you want to go into computer science, or you want to go into computing studies or animate technologies or anything like that, and you've dropped some of those crucial subjects because you didn't see the relevance, then actually there's no way of catching up. So we need to make sure we're communicating back to parents as well, that actually some of these core subjects, although they maybe seem out of context, when you contextualise them in the 21st century careers, they'll understand the importance.
When you look around the world, where does New Zealand sit in the space? Are we ahead of the curve or behind the curve or somewhere in the middle?
I think we'd like to think we're ahead of the curve, but I think in reality, I think we've got a fairly big leapfrog approach we need to catch up. Although we're very ingenious when it comes to kind of creating creative solutions, we also need to they need to be substantialised, and they need to be commercialised, and they need to be taken to the world. And I think that at the moment we have great pockets of genius and individuals who have really made a difference, but we actually need a generation of a lot more people thinking innovatively and to be more pioneering. So I think if you're looking globally, there is programs in many countries where they're trying to encourage entrepreneurship from a very early age and really understand the business opportunities of the world. I don't see that coming through except for in pockets throughout the country. And so if a student is not in a school or environment where they're getting that exposure, then by the time they may have opportunity to look at that, for many of them it's actually too late. This is an early person's game. You need to be in early. It does sound strange to be thinking about careers for an 8-year-old, but actually those times between the age of 8 and the times of 14 when they're defining their subject choices for their future is a very short period. And if they can understand the importance of some of these subjects and the potential of some of these subjects, and in particular in that convergent space, then we really are going to have these innovators coming through.